Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So today I'd finally like to go over my Paladin Oathkeeper build. Now this build is mainly set up for the new trial, but you should be able to use this entire setup in all other content. Let's jump initially to our powers. This is the general setup I will use. First up with our at-wills, we're using our Cure Wounds simply to top somebody up. Let's say you go and heal them with one of your big heal powers, and that's just not quite enough and they still miss a little bit of hit points. You'll top them up with Cure Wounds. Of course, space it out and don't spam it too much because it will use your divinity pool. We'll go into that in a little bit. Otherwise, for my secondary at-will, I like to have just Valorous Strike to be attacking your boss whenever you don't have much else to do. You can, of course, use, for example, Divine Fulmination if you want to play more of a ranged playstyle, or if you're using the Vistani set to buff your allies' damage. As for your encounter powers, well, your heal powers is going to be either Divine Touch or your Divine Shelter. Both of those have the ability to give your targets a extra layer of protection via this blue shield, and you can see Divine Shelter is going to be your power, which you will use then to give a shield to everybody. Much smaller shield, but at least everybody gets this. The unfortunate thing with Divine Touch is the more people you actually heal in this area, the lower amount of shield everybody gets. It's very good in my opinion for dungeons, or even in some scenarios in a trial where everybody's spread out, which can happen during the support phase in the new trial. Alternatively, you're just using Divine Shelter in a trial to continually give everybody that added shield and a little bit of heal to help top people up, and you would have then a cleric healer to help you out just on the constant heals. Then secondary, I would always use like Sacred Weapon, mainly for its divinity regeneration when you pair it with the Enduring Spirit feat, and along with that Circle of Divinity to again give you that divinity regen, along with 15% more outgoing healing when you cast this thing on the ground. Unfortunately, you have to stay in it, and with Sacred Weapon you don't even have to hit anything to gain that divinity regen. It's purely a passive thing. Then for our daily powers, I'm usually using Lay on Hands to top somebody if they're really low as an emergency heal button. Otherwise, I focus on Shield of Faith just to give them all that little bit of increased received incoming healing by 10% and reducing the damage they take by 5%. That would be when everybody's spread out. If you're all grouped up, Sanctuary can be that little bit better with an added heal over time effect, along with reducing the damage they take by 10%. As with regards to the mechanics, well, you have a shield where you can block damage up to 40% of your maximum hit points. It's good mainly to just resist mechanics that might throw you around and push you back. Otherwise, you generally just want to move out of red areas yourself. Can be a little bit harder since you don't have like a dodge or a sprint mechanic, something that will make you move really quickly in a direction. So it can be a little bit more challenging in content that requires you to make sure you move out of the red areas rather than just blocking them. You will run out of your shield pretty quick after blocking a few hits, and then this takes quite a while to regenerate back. As for your tab power, well, this is your Channel of Divinity. You can see that you can heal with this power, and that's due to your Hand of Divinity. Now, whenever you click this tab power just quickly, or this channel divinity quickly, you'll add a healer's mark. You'll give somebody these angel wings, and that's then the target of your big heal power, Hand of Divinity. So when you go and hold this down, and then you can let go at any time you want, but when you let go when the bar is full, you'll give them the maximum amount of shield, which is really neat. And otherwise, you can also give them an added benefit based on your class feature. For example, if you're using Aura Restoration, they'll give them an additional 2% incoming healing, the person who has this wings above their head. Class features generally going with Composure for that added divinity regen, along with Aura of Restoration, just to make it so that all your heals will be increased by a bit more by increasing everybody's incoming healing. As for the feats, I generally go with Critical Touch. You can take Sheltered Healing. It will help play more into topping up people with Cure Wounds after you've given them, let's say, a Divine Shelter, but I find Critical Touch to just be that bit more handy to make sure that you're critting on everybody. And then I go with Prayer of Opportunity. This gives me the benefit when you go and cast like a heal, you have a chance that your Hand of Divinity there on the bottom left will glow with a dotted outline, and that's when you go cast this Hand of Divinity, you'll do it for free without using any of your divinity pool. Keep in mind you have 1,000 in your divinity pool, and each of your heal powers will require you to spend that pool, and that pool will regenerate slowly. So you don't want to be spamming heals all over the place. You want to space them out since you're limited due to your pool of divinity. And Prayer of Opportunity allows you every now and again to cast a free Hand of Divinity on like the tank, giving him a nice big fat shield so that he doesn't need a heal for a little bit longer, or when you know he's going to take a big hit. Otherwise, Battle Focus can be more useful if you just can't get the timing right of Prayer of Opportunity, or it doesn't seem to fit, but I found overall its usefulness is a bit better when you can make sure to give that tank a big shield when it procs. Just keep in mind, when it does proc, it will only last 12 seconds before it expires, and if you're channeling it and then it expires and then you let go of your tab, well, you're going to be using divinity. For our third set, we're of course using Enduring Spirit, the other one's for some hybrid DPS build. Fourth set, we're going with Divine Intervention to give that extra shield whenever we use our Lay on Hands. It's pretty neat and stacks on top of our other shields, so you can pretty much fully shield a tank if you time this right. And then Convalescence I find not too useful. And finally, Emissary of Warding, just to increase the effectiveness of our heals. Divine Vessel just has a 3-minute cooldown, so it's not too useful at all in my opinion. So next up, we go to our statistics and what you want to focus on. Now right here is my stats when I'm unbuffed and out of combat. Now to go and buff up, I'll be using my Wildstorm Elixir, my Flask of Potency, and my Squash Soup. Squash Soup being really good for healers, giving crit strike and crit severity. You can use a food that will buff up your power if you need to, but right now, once we go and use our Forger's box, we can see we end up with capped out power. Our critical strike at 78%, our critical severity at 77.7%, and our outgoing healing down here at nearly 72%. What you want to focus on is initially power, then outgoing healing. You want to ideally have them kind of balanced, and lastly then you're focusing on critical severity and critical strike. I would prioritize critical severity over critical strike, just due to the fact that critical strike, we can generally have our critical touch feature allowing us to crit on everybody, and as a newer player you can rely on that a bit more, but ideally you still want your crit chance nice and high so that your Hand of Divinity has a higher chance of critting and giving them massive shield. And that's due to Emissary of Warding, making it so that our critical heals will give a much bigger divine barrier when on a critical hit. And so when I am in combat, or let's say I go cast my heals, let's say 5 times, and I get my ribcage to proc off this gear piece, we can get our stacks there. You can see on the top left we have 4, we can go and have 5, and that gives us our power capped, our crit severity capped, and also our critical strike capped. And otherwise my outgoing healing, when we do go and cast our Circle of Divinity, we do get a 15% buff, so that goes up to 86.7%. We can get that buffed up a little bit further if I do finally manage to drop the ring from Vault of Stars. Right now we're using this second decent ring, which is the Tainted Ring of the Dragon Cultist from the new Dragon Heroic Encounter in the new zone. It simply gives me 3000 outgoing healing and also some recharge speed, which is neat, but alternatively I would highly recommend the Grove's Crystal Tears Ring from Vault of Stars. It'll give you a chunk more outgoing healing, along with giving you 5% more critical strike whenever you have a shield or temporary hit points, which should be most of the time when you're healing everybody with a nice shield. So then we move overall to my gear, and you can see what I'm running here. My headpiece is the Raincatcher from Hardcore Vault of Stars mini bosses. You could use like Garistro horns instead, but it's just not reliable, and something that gives a constant buff like 7500 outgoing healing in my opinion is just better. The ribcage is good. Unfortunately you will have to do some work to keep up those stacks, but But if you're healing like multiple people all the time, let's say with Divine Shelter, you should not have a problem keeping up those stacks at all. An alternative would be the Raindrop Remnant from Vault of Stars, giving 5% outgoing healing. Definitely not as good as the 25% stats you get from the Ribcage, which again is a big grind with Avernus tier 3 Hunt. Again, from Avernus tier 3 Hunt is the Blessed Arms of Last Resistance. It's very good. It works better than what you'd think in the tooltip. You just need one party member further than 30 feet away from you, and you'll gain this bonus of 5% power and defense. Alternatives, if you're always going to be up close, is like the Crag Scaler, if you can sacrifice your movement speed. Otherwise, there are definitely like the Risk Guards of Participation. Unfortunately, we're not as good to get these stacks rapidly, and then once 10 seconds are over upon having all the stacks, they're just going to be refreshed back to 0, so it's just not too reliable. And right now our power rating with this build is pretty much capped, that having something that gives ratings isn't going to be useful at all. As for our boots, we're running with, unfortunately again, a tier 3 Hunt piece from Avernus, the Greaves of the Lightgar, 7,500 power when our health is greater than 85%. As for my weapons, I'm running with the Masterwork weapons. In my opinion, that's just one of the best weapons that you should run on a healer. Everybody can get these from the auction house, and if you do master crafting, you can create them for yourself or just gather the reagents and have a master crafter combine them to make these weapons. For my neck and waist set, you can see I am running that new set from the Zen Market. It is exclusive to that. You can buy it on the auction house, but it's a bit expensive. This is the Undying Brooch, the Undying Clasp, and the Phylactery Artifact. Now, I wouldn't recommend getting this if you're on a tight budget, but otherwise it does give the most item level, and the 3% power also helps out with your heals. So overall, it does give you more heals, at least if you're not in scaled content. If you are scaled down, or let's say on a budget, the Tiamat set is a really good set for the OP healer. Otherwise, there is the set from Vault of Stars with the Star Shard Choker, the Twinkle of the Stars, and the Sparkling Fey Emblem giving Trickster's Gift, which also gives an increase to your heals depending on your hit points and your allies' hit points, or your target's hit points. Rings, we are running with the Red Eyes Glare from the Vault of Stars. And again, I would highly recommend getting the Grove Crystal Tears instead of just this purple ring I have, you can get easily from the auction house. As for my shirt, I'm running, of course, one of the ones that gives me outgoing healing. I also like to have the one which gives awareness stat and also the outgoing healing stat, to try and pick that up. And then trousers, I'm also just running one of these ones from the mini bosses. Both of those come from mini bosses within Dragonbone Vale. I have a link in this video description to a guide to mini bosses and the treasure maps, but otherwise you can get these on the auction house for very cheap. And the reason I'm running the pants is also because of the recharge speed. So now we move on to artifacts. I would run with these 3 Heart of the Dragon artifacts, mainly because they create a set which gives 10% recharge speed, which means we can cast our Sacred Weapon more often and our Circle of Divinity more often, meaning we can regenerate our divinity back more often, along with giving us that 15% buff more often. Yes, a lot more often. Overall, you can of course run multiple different artifacts. We could run with the Jewel of the North, the Demogorgon's Reach, the Neverwinter Standard, along with the new Mythallar artifact, just for higher item level. I wouldn't bother running the storybooks unless you're running particular scaled content all the time. Then we move to our enchantments, and you can see the setup I'm running here. 2 garnets in offense, a jade and a cobalt. A utility, it's a jade. Defense, I'm just running whatever ones I have available to me, but ideally you want to focus on like defense and also awareness. As for my bonus enchantment, again I'm running recharge speed, but this would be like the last enchantment you'll ever create on your build, since it doesn't give an item level boost. Combat enchantment, I'm running Flash Freeze. There's no other enchantments out there that are going to benefit you as a healer, and this will just potentially help out your party to take less damage by putting a debuff on the enemy so they deal less damage. Overloads, I'm running with a Devil's Precision just to give me some more crit chance, and I'm running an Undead Overload or a Dragon Overload, mainly just for the trial, so so that we can reduce the damage our allies take by 10%. And they have the added effect of whenever you heal allies, you will also give them the effect of this ward. Back to our gear, just to mention the modifications. Well, in my headpiece, I'm running with crit strike. In my chest piece, I'm also running crit strike, and my arms is power, along with my boots also power. As for the neck, waist and rings, well, that's just all awareness there for a little bit of added survivability. As for what race to choose when you're creating your character, well, in my opinion, Aasimar is one of the best ones out there, just for giving you a decent buff to your outgoing healing and some defensive stats, along with increasing your party's survivability by increasing their hit points. Alternatively, some very good ones for buffing up your party's damage would be the Drow. You'd need to make sure that you're attacking your target though, and also the Mirans and Barans and Renegade. And otherwise, there are races like the Wood Elf, increasing your crit strike, the Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn, and the Standard Dragonborn, just to increase your crit strike and power along with your maximum hit points. You could pick up like the Sun Elf as well to give you more action points so you can cast your daily power more often, but not as important on a Paladin healer as our daily powers aren't that impactful. As for my ability scores, well, in this build I'm focusing on dexterity for critical severity and wisdom for outgoing healing. You could pick up charisma, but I feel it doesn't have such a big benefit. You can of course use it for the extra recharge speed if you just want to stack a lot more of that, and you can find other sources of, let's say, critical severity or outgoing healing if you can. So we move to our companions, and you can see I'm running an active companion. Now, I don't really recommend you run an EVA champion, but it's pretty neat that it does have the effect that you can basically proc a shield on your allies. You can see 5%. And he does cast this fairly regularly when in combat, refreshing that shield. And the added benefit is that this shield stacks on top of our shield. For example, his shield's going to run out, you can see that there, and then he procs another shield. So it does stack on top of our own shields, which is very neat. And if you just want to go all out on the shielding meta, then there you go. You'll have a companion that can help shield your allies. Then there is the dedicated squire, which also has the added effect of giving some pretty powerful heals on his just common strike. You can see he uses his smite, and then he gives me this dot heal for over 26,000. And if that's proccing on everybody, which it usually will, that's a pretty significant heal over time, and will definitely help you out as a Paladin healer to keep your allies healed. Otherwise, there are multiple different companions that can buff and debuff to make sure that your allies are dealing more damage, or so that they take less damage. For example, the Stalwart Lion's a pretty good one. Drizzt is another good one. The Black Death Scorpion, for making sure everybody has combat advantage all the time, is also very good. Spine Devil, which has the added effect of increasing the damage that targets take by 10%. And so we can just go ahead and run with any of these active companions, and it doesn't hurt our stats too much. We can of course use an augment companion to buff up our outgoing healing, to buff up our power or crit, and probably something I would recommend if you don't have a Bone Devil's Ribcage. But otherwise, you can see we can get these stacks off very nice and easily, even just healing with our at will, and we can go and then get those 5 stacks from the ribcage, giving us those capped out stats, which is wonderful. But otherwise, for companion equipment, I'm running 3 of these gear pieces. You can get them by doing the Scaleblight Summit adventure on multiple characters, getting 3 of these packs, and otherwise completing the Crown of Keldegonn trial. Otherwise, we're running Reinvigorate. That will also just increase our outgoing healing whenever we're healing people. Others running the Baby Deep Crow for power, Black Dragon Ion Stone for crit chance, Golden Bullet for outgoing healing. You can of course use other companions for outgoing healing, the Fawn for that crit chance and power, and the Compy for the power. And keep in mind that's capped power without running any buff food, which is very good. You are of course running though the Forger's box. And so we move on to our mounts. In our current tab, you want to have a combat power that's going to buff up your allies' damage. So that's the Pegasus, the Eclipse Lion, one of the T-Rexes, or even the Swarm. Then we're running Runic Aura. It buffs up everybody's defense and their power, which is just great. And in our stable, we're just running with this setup with our insignia bonuses. And our insignia, as you can see, are generally aggression and brutality across the board. Otherwise, we're running 2 Gladiators Guile, 2 Assassin's Covenant, and a Shepherd's Devotion. Shepherd's Devotion will just increase everybody's movement speed, which is pretty neat when you use a daily power. As for the collars themselves, the only real important ones is going to be your outgoing healing and your critical severity. Again, you could stack recharge speed here instead. Then we move to our Boons section, and with our campaign section, we run with just all of this power, the crit strike and the crit severity, and then make sure you pick up movement speed as well. Within the new trial, you may as well have the undead one, so you reduce the damage you take, and then just take like all the defensive ones, and then if you run out of boon points, then you do. But make sure to take these tier 5 ones as well. I've taken the outgoing healing and the recharge speed. You could pick up Forte, but again, it's a very minimal benefit. Then I take Blessed Advantage just to buff up the recharge speed of my allies or the people I heal, and otherwise it can give them a power buff. And if you're running with people who don't have capped power, then this can be pretty useful as well. Or let's say their power buff runs out or something. Of course, there is the more defensive one, which generally isn't needed in any content right now. As for guilds, I'm running with this critical strike bonus. I'm running with the revived sickness in case I might die, then I don't take a penalty to my hit points and then end up dying again. But if you know you might not die, the group heal potion bonus boon can be pretty good, along with stacking all of these potion bonus boons here as well. However, I believe it's still bugged that it doesn't actually heal for a significant amount anymore. And so finally, let's go over our buffs once more. We are using our Wildstorm Elixir, Flask of Potency, and Squash Soup, and that's pretty much it. Again, with my overloads, I'm running with Devil's Precision for crit chance, and then just like Undead Ward to protect everybody against those undead enemies or dragon enemies. Those wards do work, I have tested them, and so they're a pretty neat bonus for adding an extra layer of survivability to everybody. Last thing to note would be, instead of this neck waist set, you could run with the Apocalypse set. This is this set just here. I don't have it on my Paladin, so I don't run with it, but if I did, I would. And it increases the damage enemies take by 1% per stack up to 5 stacks, and that does rely on you critically hitting your target, but as a healer we are stacking crit, so that's all the more to the benefit. And then there is the Vistani set, and unfortunately we can proc it, but it's a bit finicky. You don't want to try and refresh the proc while it's still active, or it won't work, and it's a bit tricky. I might go over it in a later video when I actually obtain the set, but you'll also have to try and get the Tarot artifact. I guess you can buy it from the auction house, and this set then comes from the Barovia campaign store, along with the Apocalypse set and the dagger coming from the Money Coins Bank heist. That being then character bound, but you can unbind it and again buy it from the auction house. So overall, hopefully this build has been somewhat insightful to you guys and helps you Paladin healers out there for module 22. So again, I'd like to give a massive thank you to all of my channel members for helping me keep my channel going, and if I've presented this well, consider leaving the video a like. If you're new around here, consider subscribing. We'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.